Hey, you guys have tuned into Tough Teens. On this channel, we talk about the troubled teen industry, the behavior modification industry, behavior modification schools, programs, as seen on the Netflix docuseries, The Program. A lot of this channel, we're going to be talking about WASP programs, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs, seems to be the most well-known, most well-documented, and the Netflix docuseries, The Program, was about WASP programs. So it seems to be kind of the most well-known by people. It's also where I spent my time in a WASP program, in particular at Spring Creek Lodge. And I'd actually found a wiki kind of all about Spring Creek Lodge online. I figured we kind of read through it. In this one, I can probably add some of my own commentary since I did spend time there. But maybe we'll try to do a series where we kind of document all the different programs within WASP, as well as other programs besides WASP programs, and just kind of document each one. So without further ado, let's get into this. Spring Creek Lodge ran from 1997 to 2008, so not that long of a run. I was at Spring Creek in, I think it was 99. Spent about 8 months there. They're calling it a specialty boarding school. The history and the background of Spring Creek Lodge. Spring Creek Lodge, also called Spring Creek Lodge Academy, was a WASP behavior modification program that opened up in 1997. It was originally founded, well, I didn't realize I was there that early, so I guess I was there like 2 years in. I have heard stories of people who were some of the first kids there, where it was like a single bunkhouse. They helped build some of the cabins or watched the cabins being built. But I guess I was only there about 2 years into the program. It was originally founded as Spring Creek Community by Nancy and Steve Caudry in the 1970s. In 1996, okay, so I guess it was kind of there before. In 1996, it was purchased by Cameron Pullman, Chafin Pullman, and Dan Pert in association with WASP, and reopened as Spring Creek Lodge in 1997. It was marketed as a boarding school designed to provide a highly structured and scheduled environment for adolescents who have chosen to stray from acceptable family standards into one of drugs, alcohol, negative peer interaction, and low self-esteem. It initially operated as an all-male program, but around 1999 began also enrolling females. However, the male and female residents were kept completely separate. And when I was there were females in the program. We were completely separate. We shared like a lunchroom, not together, but like guys would eat at one point, girls would eat at another point. The only time you had any interaction with the opposite sex was in the seminars, and I think maybe once you got up to junior staff. A lot of crazy rules. We'll probably get into this, but like if your family, you lived in families, was walking from the cafeteria to class or the cafeteria to the basketball court, and there happened to be another female family within eyesight, your family leader and family father and junior staff who are with your family would say, heads down to the left, and everybody would have to look down to the left. And if you looked at girls, got caught looking at girls, you would be given I want to say it was a Cat 2, I could be mistaken. Back into the wiki here, Spring Creek Lodge was located at 75 Spring Creek Road, Thompson Falls, Montana, 59873. And I actually remember, like, it still sticks in my head writing letters. I'm pretty sure it was Blue Slide Road. So I'm not sure where the Spring Creek Road is coming from. At the time of its operation, the state of Montana had zero regulations or licensing requirements for this type of school. The program had a maximum capacity of 421 students and enrolled teenagers aged 14 to 18. Some reports allege that at their peak, the school had over 500 students enrolled and over 200 employees, making it the largest employer in all of Sanders County. The tuition was reportedly nearly $3,500 per month, grossing an estimated $20 million annually as of 2006. This type of wealth meant that Spring Creek Lodge had a huge economic and political influence on the small, primarily working-class town. SCL was reportedly endorsed by the local police department, the local newspaper, various local businesses, the Sanders County Sheriff's Department, and even the mayor. According to reports, SCL even made hefty donations to the local police department. SCL employees also reported that the school sent roughly 40% of its revenue to WASP. It was accredited by the Northwest Association of Accredited Schools, the NAAS, but it's important to note that neither the United States Department of Education nor the Council for Higher Education Accreditation recognizes the Northwest Association of Accredited Schools as an accredited agency for institutions of higher education. Just a quick commentary. I must have been fortunate when I wound up finishing high school in WASP, and maybe that's why I lucked out. So a lot of kids who wound up, finishing the program and going back home prior to completing high school, who still had to enroll in their local high school, had problems with credits not transferring and having to either like start high school completely over or didn't get all their classes. I wound up graduating. I wound up taking my SATs at Spring Creek Lodge and wound up going straight into college when I got home. I went to a state school, not like a super prestigious state school or anything like that. Didn't have any problem with the degree, but maybe I would have had problems had I tried to go back to a normal high school district. In 2006, SCL reportedly withdrew its affiliation from WASP in an attempt to distance their school from the negative publicity that WASP was receiving due to countless allegations of abuse in its programs and the 2006 Turley joint action lawsuit, which named SCL as one of the defendants in the suit. I actually joined that lawsuit. It dragged on for years, and nothing ever came of it due to jurisdiction issues. Chafin Pullman, assistant director of SCLA, referred to the school's association with WASP as a positive relationship that initially provided us with very supportive network. However, Pullman explained that SCLA has evolved into a unique and independent program. He does not foresee any significant changes to the school's day-to-day operations as a result of the split. It is reported that SCL did not change any aspects of their program or any staff members, so this action to distance themselves from WASP was entirely superficial. It is reported that when other WASP programs were shut down by authorities, such as Morava Academy in 1998, and the Academy at Dundee Ranch in 2003, many of the remaining residents were transferred to Spring Creek Lodge. It had also been reported that students at SCL were sometimes punished by being sent to other WASP programs such as Tranquility Bay in Jamaica, Morava Academy in the Czech Republic before its closure, and Casa by the Sea and High Impact in Mexico. And when I was in WASP, I believe Paradise Cove in Samoa had been shut down. I know a lot of the kids I was in Spring Creek with had actually been sent to Spring Creek Lodge, and a lot of them, they had a lot of the Samoan customs and things like that. So they were actually allowed to still wear, I believe they were called lava lavas, which were kind of these like sarong wraps or skirts that they wore in Samoa. A lot of the kids at Spring Creek were allowed to wear those because they came from Samoa, and there were a few kids who I guess had learned this like fire dancing, where they have these kind of like metal sticks that they'd put, they'd basically be essentially think of it as like a giant Q-tip that they would douse in gasoline or kerosene and set on fire, and they would do like fire dances. I do remember once or twice I don't know, it might have been at seminars or something like that, seeing kids do that. So there were kids who had come from Samoa. I don't recall if Jamaica had or hadn't been there, but I know that was a threat to students that like if you acted up, if you were somebody who was in worksheets of The Hobbit for weeks or months on end, the threat would eventually be your parents have okayed it that, we can send you to Samoa, and sometimes we can send you to Samoa without even telling your parents. We have, 51% of the rights to you essentially. And that was kind of a threat to get people to fall in line. Spring Creek Lodge Academy closed abruptly in January 2009 due to a dramatic drop in enrollment, several lawsuits, licensing issues, and oversight controversy. Founders and notable staff. Cameron Pullman was a co-founder and an administrator at SCL. He first worked for WASP at Cross Creek in 1991 and 1992. And I believe Cameron and Chafin, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if they were there all the time, but they had a house just off property. I remember occasionally when they were kind of like upset with the entire, I guess we'll call it campus for lack of a better word. I remember once or twice they called us all down to the basketball court, had a big like everybody better fall in line at kind of speech. At one point, I remember there was like a note passing scandal where guys and girls who I guess either at one time were junior staff and fell down lower, or who wound up somehow meeting at seminars and kind of forming some type of bond, were basically exchanging notes inside tubes of chapstick. And they were doing it when, guys would work in the cafeteria and serve girls and vice versa. And I forget what change they made after this actually happened. Maybe it was that like girls' family leaders would have to come up and get all the trays. Like girls weren't able to come up and get their food or something like that. I forget exactly what the change was, but after this note passing scandal, either Cameron or Chafin called us all down to the basketball court. All the families had to go down there. And I think for the next week, they served us liver and onions over white rice. The first day or two, everybody was just refusing the liver and onions and taking white rice. Not that that was super palatable, but at least you didn't have like liver and onions on your stuff. Most kids aren't going to like liver and onions. Most people in general aren't going to like liver and onions. And then eventually they made it to where everybody had to have the liver and onions, splattered all over their rice. Chafin Pullman was a co-founder and assistant director of SEL. He is the brother of Cameron Pullman. Like his brother, Chafin also first worked for WASP at Cross Creek in 1991 and 1992. Following SEL's closure, he is reported to have worked as a supervisor at Reflections Academy nearby, which was started by another former SEL employee. In 2018, 3 lawsuits against Reflections Academy in Thompson Falls were filed following allegations of sexual abuse and grooming by Chafin Pullman, as well as professional negligence related in part inadequate therapy and education. There's a great podcast called the Straight Outta BS Podcast, STR, the number 8, BS Podcast, where people like myself and others who've been in WASP programs kind of tell their stories. And there were a number of people who told stories about, and here's kind of a weird thing, a lot of times the troubled kids kind of got extra privileges. I think sometimes they had a little bit of a closer bond with the staff. Like, even though the staff didn't like a lot of these kids because they caused trouble, they had a lot more interactions with them. And I think maybe some type of fondness or relationship kind of grows. And there were some of the kids who were bad, like at one point, maybe as a way to try to kind of like win them over or something, got invited up to Cameron's house for a nice dinner. I've heard of kids going up there to watch movies. Some kids actually allege that they were given alcohol or given marijuana up at their house. I'm not too sure about that. I know stuff like that happened in The Hobbit, but I can't verify that for myself. Let's see, on to the next person. Dan Pert was a co-founder and vice president of SEL. He is Robert B. Litchfield's brother-in-law. He appears to have begun working for WASP at Majestic Ranch Academy. Michelle Mickey Manning, that name sounds really familiar, was a principal of SEL. They reportedly began working there around 2004 after SEL closed. They reopened Riverview Academy close to SEL's campus in Thompson Falls with another former SEL staff, Lauren Riddle. After Riverview, they went on to open another school in Thompson Falls called Reflections Academy in 2016 and employed Chafin Pullman there. In 2018, 3 lawsuits against Reflections Academy in Thompson Falls were filed following allegations of sexual abuse and grooming by Chafin Pullman, as well as professional negligence related in part due to inadequate therapy and education. Lauren Riddle worked in an unnamed position at SEL. After the school's closure, she and Mickey Manning left to open Riverview Academy close to SEL's campus in Thompson Falls. And Dwayne Smotherman is reported to have worked as a staff member at SEL. He is reported to have also worked at Tranquility Bay and Midwest Academy, which were 2 other WASP programs. He is also reported to have worked as a facilitator at LifeSpring. Moving on to the program structure, like other WASP programs, Spring Creek Lodge used a level system consisting of 6 levels. In order to progress through the levels, the residents needed to earn points for good behavior while avoiding demerits for rule violations, which resulted in the loss of points or sometimes levels. Teenagers on lower levels were given little to no privileges and had very little communication with their parents. Upper level residents of 4 to 6 were expected to act as junior staff and give demerits to lower level students in order to prove their trustworthiness and commitment to the program. So I believe on level 1, I think we've talked about this on other videos, but I'm not going to go too in depth. But like level 1, you weren't allowed condiments. So if you had cream of wheat, you weren't allowed butter or jam or anything. You weren't allowed to get candy bars from the, I guess we'll call it commissary for lack of a better word. I think you were allowed to watch movies on Sunday with the family. What else was there? There was normally like a juice at each meal. You weren't allowed juice. But yeah, there were certain privileges you got once you got to level 2. I believe level 3, you got phone calls. Then there was kind of a level 3 family leader where you were kind of made like the leader of your family. You were kind of like a junior staff who still had to live within the family, which is actually kind of the worst thing because, you want to be part of your family. You want to be friends with everybody else. But like if you're the family leader, you're kind of a narc, but you're not a junior staff where you get to live in a different cabin. So you have to discipline your peers, and then you also have to sleep in the same room with them at night. And if you give somebody some disciplinary action, somebody might pee on your toothbrush, punch you when you're sleeping. I've seen some crazy stuff go down. So that's kind of a whole interesting aspect. And then you have junior staff, which are kind of like mini family fathers, so to speak. I believe normally there'd be like a junior staff or two kind of assigned to each family throughout the day. Teenagers on lower levels were given little to no. Okay, so we talked about that. Spring Creek Lodge divided residents into groups called families. Some of the reported names of these families were Integrity, Wisdom, Eternity, Serenity, Charity, Courage, Unity, Legend. I believe Legend went on to be called Quest, Genesis, Destiny, Respect, Excel, Summer, Aspire, etc. Spring Creek Lodge, like many other WASP programs, forced teenagers to participate in highly intense multi-day seminars called TASK, Teen Accountability, Self-Esteem, and Keys to Success. These were marketed as a series of highly motivational, emotional growth seminars and workshops. These seminars largely consisted of various forms of attack therapy and were used in order to indoctrinate the teenagers into the school's beliefs and force them to submit to the program. According to one survivor's testimony, the seminars were horrible. They would make you tell your deepest, darkest secrets only to have them rubbed in your face for the rest of the time you were there. My dad molested me when we were younger. My mom's boyfriend raped me and she knew about it and didn't do anything, stuff like that, and they wouldn't let it go. If you didn't tell them things about you, they would kick you out of the seminars and you couldn't go back until the next month. You needed the seminars to advance in the program and go home. One seminar in particular called Accountability would have kids walking around and using all of the knowledge of kids' problems, try to tear them down. This pushed a lot of kids to the edge. They would have junior staff standing against a wall of security. So if anyone went out of control, they would restrain them. Yeah, seminars were weird. We can do a video about seminars, maybe read some kids' seminar experiences. I went to two of the seminars, Discovery, and I forget the name of the other one. The one thing that kind of sticks out in everybody's mind is at the end of one of the seminars, everybody has to bring like a towel or a pillow and basically like beat the ground until your knuckles are bloody, kind of like screaming and crying and stuff like that. And one thing you got to realize, like a lot of kids did come from like really troubled backgrounds, but a lot of kids were just kind of like rebellious upper middle class kids who in my opinion, didn't really have a reason to be in a program like that. A lot of people didn't have any trauma, and you couldn't get through the seminars without essentially admitting to trauma. So they're like, you would have to tell some story, and they'd be like, essentially be like, that's lame, that's not traumatizing. And you would have to either like embellish or even make up stories to be able to kind of get through these seminars. There were other like weird things. There was one weird thing where like one person had to come up and sit in a chair, and then we all had to like wash their feet. Very, very odd stuff. Parents were also made to attend special parent seminars, which were used to brainwash and indoctrinate parents as their children were experiencing the same. In addition, there were reports of parents recruiting other parents to send their children to SEL, and in return, they had part of their tuition fees waived. Students graduated the program when they had either completed all 6 levels or turned 18. If the resident turned 18 before completing all 6 levels, they, the youth, could choose an exit plan. The exit plan was a method of control used by many WASP and other behavior modification programs to force residents who turn 18 before they graduate the program to voluntarily continue the program or another 18-plus program. The alternative to continuing treatment would be a total excommunication by the family. This is because the family of the young adult legally had no obligations to take the resident back, but the exit plan was ultimately up to the parent to decide. If the youth were not prepared to cut any connection with his or her family and stay at Camas Ranch for young male adults and Canyon View Park for young female adults, were offered as an alternative exit plan. So I guess if you turned 18 and hadn't finished a program, they wanted you to stay in. I believe they either made you junior staff, moved you to a different campus. Sometimes you get a little bit more privileges, maybe be able to get a part-time job in town or go to public high school. But basically what the exit plan was, and I don't know if I ever knew what mine was, but essentially to try to kind of like threaten you and scare you, it would be like, look, if you don't graduate the program, not only is none of our family ever going to talk to you again, you're not welcome to come home, and they're not even going to bring you back to your own city. Like, okay, we'll give you, $20 and a bus ticket to Missoula or $20 and a bus ticket to Spokane. A lot of kids were dropped off at like homeless shelters in Spokane. I was brought home a couple months before I turned 18. I wouldn't have stayed in beyond 18. I didn't graduate. My parents just took me home. I'd wound up getting into college. I think my parents probably figured I'd kind of like learned my lesson. I'm sure they didn't enjoy spending the money they were spending. I came home with them and then was home for a couple months and then wound up going off to college, albeit a year early because I had graduated early. But yeah, I don't know any friends or anything from Spring Creek who took the exit plans. But it was basically made to kind of scare you into having no other option but to get into the program. I know my family, and even if my parents decided to shun me, I think the rest of my family probably would have shunned my parents, and I would have had support from my grandparents and other people. But that's not necessarily the case for everybody. Another process that was required to complete the program was called the Trail of Lights. According to one survivor's testimony, towards the end of the program, you had to go through a process called Trail of Lights. It started off with a big meal and then goes into a strenuous workout, push-ups, jumping jacks, sit-ups, running, and whatever else they can think of. After a long day of jumping jacks, they blindfolded us and started leading us through the woods. They would walk us through creek beds and into trees. The staff was laughing the whole time at our discomfort. They had us climb up a steep rock slide, still blindfolded. Several students fell down and rolled all the way down to the bottom. At the end of the night, everyone had cuts and gashes all over their body from running into trees and walking through thorn patches and rolling down rocky hills. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's terrible, but it's like insane that like this went on, that they got away with this for so long, that programs like this still exist. It was one of the most pointless processes I have ever been through, somebody was quoted as saying. Let's see. Wow, this one's pretty. I guess it's not too much longer. Okay. Rules and punishment. The teenagers at SCL were forced to comply with a strict set of rules at all times. Some of these rules included not being allowed to interact with residents on lower levels, having to travel around campus in a straight line, maintaining good posture. And they really don't go into very much depth here. So that's what the thing was. I believe 2 level 1s couldn't. There was like a weird thing about who you could talk to. Like 2 level 1s couldn't talk to each other. Level 2s couldn't talk to each other unless a level 3 was around. There were all types of weird rules about who you could talk to. It would be, this video would go on way too long if I got into all the rules. Like when you were in the cabin, if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you would have to walk to the bathroom door and say cross, and the family leader or family father would have to say cross, and then you'd be allowed to go into the bathroom. You weren't allowed to fart without asking for permission. You weren't allowed to burp without asking for permission. Obviously, sometimes these things happen involuntarily, and you could potentially wind up getting in trouble for that. You couldn't talk well in line, well out of turn. It was a big no-no to leave the lunchroom with food or silverware. They basically thought that you were going to wind up running away. Like I mentioned earlier, you couldn't look at girls. You couldn't swear. There was something called like war stories where even though you had to talk about your past behavior and past life, if they dictated that you were glorifying anything or looking back fondly on any of your partying or misdeeds, you could be punished for that. You couldn't talk to girls. You couldn't look at girls. I mean, we could go on and on and on. But yeah, that's what some of the rules were like. Any moving up and down in the point system was done. Any moving up and down in the system was done via a point system or merit system, which was controlled by good and bad behavior and the ability to observe the rules. Negative points or demerits would be given to students that disobeyed any rule of the program. These demerits also had levels or categories which were decided by the severity of the rule violation. And the categories were Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, Cat 4, Cat 5. This stands for Category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Category 1, these demerits would cost a resident 5 points. They could be given for things such as bad posture, being even 1 second late to line, or anything else the staff or residents felt was unsatisfactory. Category 2, these demerits would cost a resident 25 points. They could be given for things such as leaving their water bottle somewhere. We didn't even have water bottles when I was there. Talking to somebody without permission, not following directions precisely, or even just making a noise without permission. Actually, you know what? Maybe we did have water bottles, but it's not like we were walking around with Stanleys. I think we had like old plastic water bottles. But even I don't even know if we had those. Category 3, these demerits would cost a resident 50 points. They could be given for things such as sharing or borrowing items, having a negative attitude, or any blatant rule violation. Here was another rule violation. I'm going to interrupt for a second. When you were like, let's say you didn't eat all your food and somebody asked for your apple or something like that. If you took somebody's food or gave somebody food, I believe that was a Cat 2 or a Cat 3. Next, we got Cat 4. These demerits would cost a resident 2 of their levels and all of their points. This could be given for something as small as glancing out a window. And Cat 5, these demerits would cause a resident to lose all their levels and all their points, in effect starting the program over. This could be given for things like self-harm, self-infliction, or drug use or alcohol. However, even minor things like popping pimples or throwing up from overeating were considered self-infliction and could result in a Category 5 demerit. If the student blatantly did not follow or show a blatant disrespect for the rules, they could be put in an isolation room called the Hobbit or the Hobbit hole or dog pound and placed on what's called an intervention. Intervention was a form of solitary confinement, which has been shown to be extremely unethical to minors and in general. These isolation rooms were approximately 5 by 7 and were unheated and reportedly covered in urine, feces, and blood. They didn't say this, but I'll add as well boogers. Before you went into the Hobbit, you were basically stripped of all your clothes, put into a red sweatsuit that was like never washed that everybody else wore. It said Hobbit on it, written in magic marker. You would have to use a porta potty instead of a real restroom. And your meals, I don't know if it was all the meals. I know for breakfast, I don't know if it was maybe for breakfast you eat a banana. For the rest of your meals, and I think you only got maybe 2 meals a day. You would get a stale tortilla with this like rice and bean concoction, and that was kind of like part of the punishment. You also weren't given anything, no pens, no paper, no books, so like nothing really to do while you were in there. Students on intervention were forced to sleep on a block of wood with no mattress. There was no access to water in the rooms, and the windows were barred shut. And if you want to see a picture of the Hobbit, if you Google like the Hobbit Spring Creek Lodge, it'll pop up on Google Images. I think I've actually used the image on some of my videos as a thumbnail before. But yeah, Google it. I'd encourage you guys to check it out. It's like a photo of like 2 wooden bunk beds in a small room, kind of a metal grate over the windows. And I think there was like a box that locked up your shoes with like a roll of toilet paper on top. John Francis, an educational and forensic psychologist, testified during the WASP trial about his son's stay at Spring Creek Lodge and stated his son spent nearly 9 months in the Hobbit, a small structure that was no more than 2 shelves on top of one another. His body was barely able to fit. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. So cold, his orange he stowed away at night was frozen by morning. He was forced to sleep on a small shelf and urinate in his drinking cup during the night. He etched the words, "Let freedom ring," on one of the shelves. How a guy who's an educational and forensic psychologist like went along with the program, didn't think to investigate further. Like I get that parents are, maybe in emotional turmoil and maybe make stupid decisions. But I mean, shame on this guy. This guy definitely should have known better, in my opinion. Other punishments at Spring Creek Lodge reportedly used were duct taping residents' mouths shut, violent physical restraints, and physical abuse, such as hitting, punching, and kicking residents. There was also a punishment called the gravel pit, which they reportedly stopped using around the year 2000, in which residents would be forced to perform extreme exercises and tasks in a deep gravel pit, such as running up and down the pit's steep side for hours at a time. And they didn't mention worksheets, but prior to going to the Hobbit, unless you did something quote unquote really bad, you'd be sent to worksheets where you would listen to like Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins tapes, as well as like biographies of Henry Ford. And you'd have to like take tests on these things and pass the tests to be able to get out of the Hobbit. Lastly, abuse, death, and closure. Spring Creek Lodge has been widely recognized as a confirmedly abusive program. Both the program and its staff have been accused of sexual abuse, physical violence, and psychological duress. On October 8th, 2004, a 16-year-old female resident, Carly Newman, successfully committed, I'm not going to say this word on YouTube because, it could get the video kind of hidden or taken down, committed a self-harm act at SCL just before her 17th birthday. It's reported that she put something around her neck in one of the bathrooms at the facility using a sweatshirt. It is reported that she was put into isolation nearly 30 times during her 6-month stay. She had apparently only been a mere 5 weeks away from leaving the program and going home when she died. SCL was investigated by the Montana Department of Health and Human Services. Following her death, her parents also filed a wrongful death lawsuit alleging negligence, breach of contract, fraud, and deceit. SCL reportedly settled with Newman's parents out of court. In 2012, the Newmans requested a new trial as retired Justice John Warner, who was brought in to hear the case, wrongly barred the jury from hearing evidence that other WASP-affiliated schools were shut down and investigated for abuses. A new trial was granted in a district court. In 2006, Montana PBS produced a televised segment called Who's Watching the Kids, which focused on Spring Creek Lodge and particularly the abuses that occurred there. This expose stirred up much interest in the local community about the nature of Spring Creek Lodge's program. Spring Creek Lodge closed abruptly in January 2009 due to a dramatic drop in enrollment, several lawsuits, licensing issues, and oversight controversy. It is reported that even years after the campus was abandoned, the buildings were still filled with fragments of past students' lives, journals, progress notes, letters, and medical and mental health records. Shortly before its closure, there was an attempt made by SCL's owners to open two branches of SCL. The first was run by an 18-plus all-boys program called Camas Ranch, located at 145 Fitchett Road in Plains, Montana, 59859, only about 1.5 miles away from SCL. Camas Ranch opened around 2008. In addition, there was also Canyon View Park, which was analogous program, but for females 18 plus, also located nearby in Thompson Falls. However, these programs closed shortly after the closure of SCL. In addition, there are reports that many other spin-off programs were opened in the Thompson Falls area by former SCL staff members following the school's closure, including a program in the same name as one of Pullman's programs in Utah, Riverview Academy, which was opened in 2010 by Michelle Mickey Manning, and a program called Clearview Horizon in 2015. So I think we got a couple if we got a couple survival stories on here. We'll kind of read these. This was kind of like a very big picture overview. I was actually kind of hoping it would get into a little bit more of like the silly rules and what day-to-day was like. I covered a lot of that in another video. I think it was one of the first or second videos posted on this channel. If you guys have any memories, anything you want to point out, feel free to drop it in the comment section below. We'll read one or two of these kind of survivor stories. So unknown survivor, unknown date, 1999 to mid-2001. An anonymous survivor of Spring Creek alleges that he witnessed the following during his time there. A team named Chris was being noisy after shutdown, which was lights out. He was knocked to the floor and restrained. When other kids tried to interfere, Chris was complaining about not being able to breathe. They were also face down, restrained by staff. A group of kids were transported to the Hobbit. They did not receive breakfast or lunch the following day. A teen named Gabe was bear hug restrained by staff. Gabe had asked another student to quit flicking the back of his ear. Staff slammed Gabe's face down into asphalt. This caused the cracking of several of Gabe's front teeth. A 12-year-old boy was in the Hobbit and spat all over. Staff informed him that he would use the boy's body to wipe up the spit. After the next spit, they did so. A teen by the name of Jeff, I remember Jeff. I believe he had a brother, a twin brother, if I'm not mistaken. I think they were from Michigan. Had cut himself on purpose several times from the elbow to the wrist. He then used his blood to write the word "free me" on the wall next to his bunk. I think he actually at one point had broken and eaten a light bulb and had to be sent to the hospital. And it was very disturbing being in a program as a teenager, knowing that you couldn't tell your parents or anybody what was going on, knowing that you were cut off from the outside world. And I remember Jeff in particular, I remember hearing him scream in the Hobbit, like as he was being restrained and things like that. It was just like kind of like a blood curdling, kind of really disturbing type of thing. Another teen was forced to scrub the blood off the wall. Cameron Pullman told a group of teens that a teen there named Daniel had paranoid